So in today's video, it's going to be about evangelism, but one of the podcasts we're going to watch to go along with the theme of evangelism is some of my favorite evangelists sit down and talk with Charlie Kirk, and some people may even consider Charlie Kirk somewhat of an evangelist because some of his conversations that he has on some of these campuses always lead back to the gospel. That's part of the reason why, in my opinion, he's successful, and why I also sometimes like watching him. But in today's video, he sits down with Cliff and Stuart Knechtle. I think that's how you say it. And they talk about God's anger. They talk a little bit about what they talked about with Logan Paul. But they also get into the conversation of, why do people reject the gospel? And I think when it comes to being an evangelist, we have to understand why people reject it so that we can properly evangelize in certain situations. If we understand somebody's point of view, we can better communicate the gospel to them. So let's go ahead and jump into this. Before we jump into this video, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video so that YouTube pushes us out even more. Let's go ahead and jump into it.
All right, so here's some of the challenges. I really respect Logan Paul. He began our time together by saying, I am not a Christian, but maybe by the end of this podcast, I will be.
No pressure.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that kind of honesty and vulnerability, goodness gracious, that's cool. I found him to be a very nice guy, and it was fascinating, his sticking point. His sticking point was, you got to be kidding me. Good Jews and good Muslims and good Hindus, they need to accept Christ? I mean, that just is too narrow. That's just too bigoted. It's too intolerant. And so what I was trying to help him see was, if I say that every path leads to God, that's a truth claim. I'm saying the majority of Muslims, the majority of humanity, which is Muslims, Christians, and Jews, they're wrong. Every path leads to heaven. That's a truth claim. If I say to you, half the religions and philosophies of the world lead to heaven, that's a truth claim. I'm saying half are right and half are wrong. That is a truth claim. And when Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life, no one comes to the Father except through me, that's also a truth claim. He's saying, you've got to put your faith in me. I am the way to heaven. So let's be real honest. We all make truth claims. Let's not sit back and act like, oh, I'm a really open-minded, really tolerant person because I say all paths lead to heaven, all paths lead to God. No, you're making a truth claim. And I can promise you, if I say that 1 + 1 = 2, I'm not necessarily being arrogant. Now, I might be arrogant, but just to make a truth claim does not mean you're being arrogant and intolerant. It means this is my take on reality. You better ask me, what's the evidence that your take on reality is true? And I'm going to ask you the same question. And what is your take on reality? What's the evidence that your take on reality is true?
So kind of tell us about the discussion you had with him and either one of you, the response that you received.
I thought he was really genuine. He gets pegged for trying just to poke holes and then walk away. But I thought he was genuine. I mean, he did ask questions like, will animals be in heaven? And, the lion will lie down with the sheep. So I believe that animals will be in heaven, literally. He would ask questions like, why Jesus amongst other religions? He said he got burned a few times by Christians who were so judgmental about other faiths. And so we dug into that a little bit. But his mom was sitting there the whole time. And I guess his mom typically doesn't show up, but she showed up for us, and she held her cross out the entire time, kind of pointing it to Logan, pointing it to us. And I think that shows her obvious desire to get her sons, him and Jake, really thinking about the faith and moving towards the faith. So that was a very, very interesting part of it, because he would really come after, he mainly really went after you. I tried to more of the emotional connection. And yet at the same time, I think at the end of the time, he was genuinely wrestling, and yet he would turn to his mom and try and, again, push back on her faith. So it's fascinating dynamics, but offset yet again, there was still an hour of time where he wanted to connect.
His objection was that Christianity is too true or something? Or that...
Too narrow.
Too narrow, yeah.
No, I'm being facetious.
Yeah.
That's good. I mean, too narrow. I don't understand the objection there. Like what would that apparently
I completely actually understand this objection because of the way society is framed right now. A lot of the people that are in uproar, it's all about inclusiveness. So when Christianity makes a claim that Christ is the only way, then we are excluding all other religions from being the right way and the right pathway to God, the right pathway to heaven. So just the narrative of society and being so inclusive right now is part of the reason we have people like Logan Paul who think that Christianity is exclusive and too exclusive, and it doesn't include other religions as being the right way, which is so crazy because if you really think about it, all of these other religions are the ones that focus solely on the person being good enough or taking certain steps or certain religious habits and making them a daily practice in order to make it to heaven. But is it exclusive when you say that in order to get to heaven, I don't need you to be a good person, I don't need you to pray 6 times a day, I don't need you to give away all your money to your homeless neighbor, I don't need you to do anything specific. All I need you to do is believe that I am who I say I am, and that I died for your sin so that you can live forever with me. And that the only aspect of that you have to believe is that within your heart you have to believe it and confess it with your mouth to receive salvation eternally. And Jesus says this is all you have to do, is believe in him, and that he did all those things I just described. Whereas every other religion focuses on how good you can be. What can you do? How can you work to get to heaven? In my opinion, and this is once you dig into it deeper, in my opinion, all of the other religions would be exclusive, too exclusive, because their narrow and work-based way to get to heaven excludes everyone, because none of us will ever equal up to God's glory. And Jesus' way is the only way that we will ever be made right, and the only way we will ever be sanctified in God's eyes. So, I do understand it. However, Jesus really is the only way. Let's continue to watch.
He's just saying that no way that God would allow this to happen, that God would not send a son, or what would his, because I didn't watch the entire
You bet.
interview.
All right. Who here has a problem with the idea of God being angry? All right, well, Logan has a problem with God being angry. And guess what? So do a lot of Americans. You know, God is love. God doesn't get angry. The wrath of God? I mean, how primitive. You really believe that? Yeah, I sure do believe that. You know why? Because I promise you that if one of you kidnaps one of my little granddaughters, I'm going to be real angry. And guess what? If I'm not angry, my granddaughter doesn't matter to me. Not with a selfish anger, but with a righteous indignation. Is God angry? Yes, he is. Not with a selfish anger. Oh, you've offended me. Oh, you rained on my party. No, none of that. With a righteous indignation of how we dehumanize each other, that's sin. Racism is dehumanizing. Sexism is dehumanizing. Sexually exploiting someone is dehumanizing. She's not a Barbie doll. She's a human being created in the image of God. Don't use her sexually. Greed, dehumanizing. Your money's more important than you are. I want your money. Coveting, dehumanizing. And so God is angry because we dehumanize each other, and God has created us not to dehumanize each other, but to respect each other, to love each other.
So when you visit campuses, is that the most common sticking point, that the path is too narrow? If you had to really bring it down, what is the limiting current belief of Gen Z when confronted with the truth that prevents them from accepting Jesus? What would that be?
Yeah, moral relativism, for sure. And this white, Western adopted philosophy, which is all religions are true, and how dare you say that you have the right religion. So they will say, look at the elephant, look at all paths lead up to the mountaintop. So all religions are just grabbing, one's grabbing the ear, one's grabbing the foot of the elephant, one's grabbing the trunk. And see, you guys are all just grabbing part of God. And yet what they don't get is, well, those people are blind, so they don't realize they're grabbing parts of the elephant. Well, okay, then someone has tremendous vigilance and spiritual superiority to say, I'm the one who's not blind. And I see Charlie grabbing the trunk, so he's Buddhist. I see Cliff grabbing the foot, so he's Hindu. So you guys are all idiots. All gods are the same. But what you don't realize is you are not only spiritually elitist, but you are also rejecting the exclusive truth claims of 95% of the world. So that's one of the biggest challenges.
Would you agree with that? Is that the core objection you receive?
Yeah, and now let's be real honest. I think it really comes down to I want to sleep with whoever I want to sleep with.
Well, that's a separate issue, though. But
See, I don't really think it is a separate issue, which I think they get into it. We're going to watch the rest of what he has to say. But what he's getting at is all of these other religions allow for the immoralities that these people want to basically delve into. So, like, say I am a certain religion, and in that religion, I can have 6 wives. And the God that I believe in is okay with that. I would never come to Christianity because the one that I'm believing in now is allowing me to do the things that I want to do, regardless of whether or not they're good for me. Christianity holds to its moral statements. So when it says that in the Old Testament that adultery is a sin, when Jesus comes, he even raises the bar and says that the very thought or the very lustful thought of a woman in your head is adultery in itself. So, if I believe in one religion, I'm allowed to do this. If I believe in this religion, I can do that. But if I believe in Christianity, I have to then self-reflect and make a decision on whether or not what I'm actually doing is bad. And what's easier? Is it to self-reflect and understand your own vices, or just go down a pathway that says your vices are okay? I hear what Cliff is saying. A lot of people choose these other religions based on the fact that they feel comfortable in their sin to choose those religions. Christianity, however, and if you have a real relationship with Jesus, he's not going to back down from what he says is right and what is wrong. So I get what he's saying here.
But meaning that they won't believe it if it's true. That's Frank Turek's line. Would you believe Christianity if it was true?
Right.
And most people would not, because it would change their life.
Correct. And so therefore, the reason I reject Christ is for a moral reason, and then I hide behind the intellectual reason. But if you push comes to shove, I mean, my younger brother went to Princeton University, and at Princeton, he used to share Christ with his roommates late into the night. Around about midnight, he'd turn to his Princeton classmates and say, guys, if you're just going to ask these questions, we'll pull an all-nighter if this is honest. But if the real issue is, I want to sleep around, and I want to cheat on my next exam because the pressure to get into med school is intense, then let's be honest. And every single time his Princeton classmates would say, Stuart, you're correct. This is not an intellectual problem. It's a moral issue. Of course, yeah. And he would say, guys, wait, we don't have to pull an all-nighter. Good night. Have a good night's sleep.
So then, how then do you overcome that, if at all?
I think for me, it's getting rather simple the older I get. You know, morality's relative, which means the guy who took a whack at President Trump and killed another guy, it's all relative. That's his definition of truth. And the trade traffic, well, you know, it's all relative. So if you're upset about it, fine, but I kind of enjoy it. And truth is relative. You know something? You can't live that out. Because even when you were a little kid, if your sibling got more ice cream in their ice cream bowl than you did in your ice cream bowl, what would you say? Oh, that's cool? No, you'd say, that's not fair. And if you're married, and your spouse takes a whack at you, you don't say, oh, that felt good, honey, why don't you do that again? No, you say, you should not do that. You ought not to do that. It is impossible to live out moral relativism. Doesn't work.
Do you find that to be persuasive to the students you talk to?
I take a different route. That's probably the better route. I take the route, though, of, look, statistically, 2 guys from Yale wrote this book, Premarital Sex in America. And promiscuity is directly correlated with serious mental health problems, especially for women. Men, for some reason, are able to cut off their emotions sexually from the physical side and just live out their physical well-being of shagging any woman they possibly can. But there's clear breakdown as well, these Yale authors are writing, showing that there's a drastic increase in divorce if you're sleeping around as well. But again, you can go there.
Yeah.
But the best answer is making Christ more attractive than just, I'm going to shag the next thing or person with a pulse that I possibly can. And if Jesus is more attractive in the way where he says, I love you unconditionally, no matter your failings. I offer you grace. It's the whole idea of your job can't die for you. Your job, if you find your identity in it, you're going to be ultimately crushed. If you find your identity in your wife, you're going to be ultimately crushed. It's St. Augustine's ordered loves. If you put God at the top, you will live a life of incredible flourishing. So that's kind of where I go.
Yeah, and I want to get to some questions here in a second. I visit college campuses, as you guys do, and I get the spicier encounters at times. I'm sure you guys get them as well. But what's so fascinating is that I'll come and talk primarily about politics, but as you well know, I always share the gospel whenever it comes up. But inevitably, almost always, if I go and I have a table and what I want to talk about for the day never remains, and it could be about immigration, it could be about that there are no genders and two sexes and unlimited personalities, whatever it is. Within minutes, they are asking me, well, are you religious? Because they have been so trained and conditioned because they want to get down into, well, where is this coming from? Because if you're saying something that's true and they think about it, they say, well, do you think there's a God that's telling you this? Because they want a moral license to live as they want to live. But what I've found is that almost all of these conversations yield back to some moral standard at some point.
I tend to agree with Charlie Kirk here. I think there is really two major reasons that I see people rejecting Christianity. And moral relativism falls right into the number one thing, which is just a desire to do whatever it is that you want to do, absent of any consequence, absent of, anybody looking down on you or anybody kind of being judgmental. And a lot of times it doesn't take anybody coming at you with that sort of attitude. It just simply takes somebody telling you, hey, this isn't probably the best way to live your life. And it could be completely out of love that you say that to somebody, and they're still going to look at you as if you're being judgmental, but what you're simply trying to do is show them a better way of life that leads to a better fruit, a better outcome, a better life. And if you point out something is wrong with something that somebody loves, let's say like drinking, sexual immorality, addiction, anything that they hold and covet higher than what they're coveting God at that moment, a lot of people begin to take offense to this. And that was one of the main reasons people will just reject Christianity altogether, because it tells them that what they're currently doing is not what God has planned for you. God wants something better for you. And first you have to get that person to understand that the limitations that God wants to put on your life are not to at all limit you, but to open up the potential, the full potential of your life, the full potential of what you're capable of. And once you begin to live within God's will, there is nothing that you can't do that will leave you just an overall more flourishing life. But it's so hard when somebody thinks that they're right, which leads me to the second reason I think people really tend to reject the gospel, and that is pride. And it's just simply and religion and just evangelism. And in this case, when I say pride, I think it's just the willingness to admit that you had it wrong and that Jesus is the right way. And I think those two things it's just really that simple. Pride and morality and honestly, the pride and morality thing kind of intertwine, because it's super prideful to just not admit that the current path you're going down is the wrong path, even though it's obvious, or at least it should be. And it's super hard for some to admit that their old ideologies are wrong. So I think it's really, and it just brings back to another point I've made in past videos, that one of the main things Christians really need to focus on is being slow to speak, right? And quick to listen, and being slow to anger. When you put those things together, I think we have the best formula for being able to speak to people out of love in this society and getting them to believe in who Jesus is. And if we're willing to do those things along with live a lifestyle that glorifies Jesus, not by trying to be better people, but just by trying to get closer to God. Because I think if you try to focus on being a better person, you'll ultimately fail. But if you focus on Jesus, being a better person is just going to come right along with that. If you focus on your relationship with Jesus, he'll begin to wean out those things that you thought were impossible to wean out just because you're putting all your focus on him. So I hope that this video prepares you a little more for evangelism. I hope that it gets you ready for that next conversation you have at work, or the next conversation you have when you go out in the public and you begin to speak to somebody about Jesus and they disagree with some things. We have to be prepared for some of the arguments, some of the common just misconceptions people have about Christianity. So, as always, I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to put on the full armor of God and have a blessed day.